Ashes drifted across the ruins of the manufactorum like black snow. The air was thick with smoke, stinking of promethium fires and charred flesh. Lasgun barrels glowed faintly in the darkness as the surviving guardsmen clutched them with trembling hands, their faces hollow from exhaustion and terror. The ultramarines stood among them like statues of war, unbowed despite cracked ceramite and dried tyrannid ichor clinging to their armor. Captain Cassian surveyed the wreckage, his helm under one arm, his face a grim mask etched with the weight of command. Around him, his battle brothers Drakon and Varos checked their weapons in silence, every motion precise, ritualistic, the calm competence of warriors bred for eternal war. There was no victory here, only survival, and survival was never guaranteed. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, even silence was an enemy. The guardsmen knew it. Each broken wall could hide a lurking Xenos. Each shadow stretched too long, as though the hive itself reached for them. The hive groaned in its death throes, steel beams creaking as if the building itself mourned the fallen. Cassian raised his vox bead to his lips. "Report." Veros's voice rumbled like thunder. "No vox return from command. The regiment is gone." A pause. Dracon's scarred face was unreadable, but his words cut like a blade. Not gone. Consumed. The mortals flinched at the word. Tyrannids did not kill to kill. They fed. They absorbed. They unmade the very matter of their prey until nothing remained but biomass for the hive. The silence here was not peace. It was hunger, waiting. Cassian looked to the guardsmen, perhaps 20 souls where once there had been hundreds. Their eyes were wide, yet some still held their ground, jaw clenched, lasgun steady. He saw bravery there. Fragile, yes, but real. "Stand firm," Cassian told them, his voice heavy with certainty. "You have not been abandoned. You fight at the side of the sons of Guillaman. Your sacrifice will weigh against the Xenos, and the Emperor will know your names." A ripple of strength moved through the guardsmen, faint but visible. Words mattered, even here, in this graveyard. But then Veros shifted, helm turning eastward. His auspex pinged softly, a pulse of warning. "Movement," he growled. The guardsmen raised their weapons, panic quickening their breaths. Drakon leveled his plasma pistol toward the shadows, his stance perfect despite the wear of battle. Veros adjusted the auspex, narrowing its sweep. The ping became sharper, more defined. The shape was wrong, too large for gaunts, too swift for a carnifex. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Something hunts us. The ash swirled thicker. The ruins seemed to close in, and the silence stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only one way to truly live: to face the abyss and refuse to look away. Here, in the ashes of the manufactorum, the abyss had found them, and it was moving closer. The ruins stretched outward like a graveyard of steel and stone. The Manufactorum had once been a beating heart of imperial industry, its assembly lines forging tanks, armor plating, and munitions for 100 regiments. Now it was gutted, its machinery twisted and half-melted, its walls blackened by the fury of war. The survivors picked their way through it in silence, guardsmen moving in loose ranks, while the ultramarines took the vanguard. Every step crunched on bone or rubble, every shadow seemed to lean closer. Cassian kept his helm clipped to his belt, trusting his own eyes. He knelt in the dust where the ferrocrete was cracked and smeared with something dark. Not blood, not oil, something thicker, slicker, almost resinous. He ran a gauntleted hand across it, then lifted his fingers to the air. The strands stretched like webbing before breaking. His jaw tightened. "Spore trace," he said flatly. Varos brought his auspex forward, its green rune glow casting hard light against his scarred armor. He scanned the ground. The machine beeped, registering faint impressions across the dust. Talons, claws, and a dragging trail like a tail moving through ash. "These prints," Varos muttered, "are no gaunts." Draken's face was pale as stone, his gaze unflinching. "The hunter walks here." The guardsmen gathered, craning their necks to see. One of them, a corporal with a bandaged arm, swallowed hard. "Sir, what makes tracks like that?" Cassian turned his eyes toward the soldier. "A lictor." The name alone was enough to drain color from the mortals' faces. Even the ones who had fought bravely clutched their lasguns tighter, some muttering the Emperor's name beneath their breath. Cassian stood, towering over them, his voice a steady iron bell. "Fear is the weapon of such beasts. Do not give it purchase. A lictor hunts alone, not in swarm. We shall face it, and we shall end it." Draken's lips curled in the faintest shadow of a smile. "If we can find it before it finds us." The trail wound deeper into the Manufactorum's skeletal remains. Cassian raised his hand, signaling advance. His brothers spread in a practiced arc, Varos covering high ground with bolter raised, Draken moving low and silent, his blade drawn. The guardsmen trailed nervously, each man and woman keenly aware that a single heartbeat could be their last. Atmosphere pressed in thick, cloying. The smoke above formed strange shapes in the shifting wind. Every broken pipe hissed like a whisper. Somewhere, distant, metal fell with a clang, echoing like laughter through the ruins. The auspex chirped again. Varos frowned beneath his helm. "It is close, yet it eludes. Every time I narrow the sweep, it vanishes." Camouflage. The lictor's gift. Skin that rippled with mimicry, bending light, swallowing sound. A perfect killer sent ahead of the swarm to terrorize and isolate prey. Cassian raised his chainsword, its teeth growling as though hungry. "Then let it come. It will find we are not so easily devoured." The guardsmen looked about frantically, their nerves fraying. One of them tripped over twisted cabling, the clatter echoing too loud in the tense stillness. He cursed, scrambled back to his feet, and then froze. For in the dust before him, fresh tracks appeared, claw prints forming where nothing stood. The lictor was here. The manufactorum fell into a silence so heavy it seemed alive. Every guardsman's breath came ragged, misting in the ash-thick air. The claw prints stretched forward in the dust, each step forming as though by phantom feet. Then they stopped. Nothing moved. The auspex in Varros's gauntlet pulsed once, then flatlined to static. He slammed it with his fist, but the readings remained broken. "Jamming field," he growled. "The beast is bending the spectrum." Dracon's plasma pistol hummed softly as its coils charged, his one good eye scanning the shadows. "It's toying with us, bleeding fear into the ranks." The guardsmen trembled, laser guns wavering in their grip. One whispered a prayer too loudly, voice cracking. Another turned in a circle, trying to catch movement that wasn't there. Cassian's voice cut through the tension like a bolter shot. "Hold the line." He stepped forward, chainsword low, helm slotting into place with a hiss of seals. His voice now thundered through vox amplifiers. "This shadow thinks itself hunter. Let us remind it of its place." The first strike came swift and silent. A guardsman at the rear screamed as something invisible plucked him off the ground. His body convulsed, dragged upward into the rafters before laser bolts could even flash. A spray of blood rained down, steaming as it hit Ferrocrete. "Contact!" Varros roared, his bolter barking explosive shells into the rafters. Each round detonated, showering sparks and splinters of steel. But there was nothing there, only dripping blood and the echo of the man's last scream. The guardsmen staggered, fear cracking their formation. "Eyes forward," Dracon barked, voice sharp as his blade. He pointed his plasma pistol into the smoke, firing a hot white shot. It lit the ruins like lightning. For an instant, they saw it. A towering shape clinging to the wall, talons, claws, and feeder tendrils twitching in hunger. Its carapace rippled, blending seamlessly into the stone until the light broke across its edges. Then it vanished again, slipping into the dark like a nightmare receding. Cassian strode into the open, daring. His voice was steady, implacable. "This beast thinks itself hunter. Let us remind it of its place." The first strike came swift and silent. A guardsman at the rear screamed as something invisible plucked him off the ground. His body convulsed, dragged upward into the rafters before laser bolts could even flash. A spray of blood rained down, steaming as it hit Ferrocrete. "Contact!" Varros roared. His bolter barked explosive shells into the rafters. But there was nothing there. Only dripping blood and the echo of the man's last scream. The guardsmen staggered, fear cracking their formation. "Eyes forward," Dracon barked, voice sharp as his blade. He pointed his plasma pistol into the smoke, firing a hot white shot. It lit the ruins like lightning. For an instant, they saw it. A towering shape clinging to the wall, talons, claws, and feeder tendrils twitching in hunger. Its carapace rippled, blending seamlessly into the stone until the light broke across its edges. Then it vanished again, slipping into the dark like a nightmare receding. Cassian strode into the open, daring. His voice was steady, implacable. It hides because it fears. A beast does not stalk angels unscathed. The guardsmen looked to him, their courage shored by his presence. But another scream tore through their ranks as the lictor struck again, this time cleaving a man in half before melting into invisibility. Blood steamed on Ferrocrete. Curse, Varos cursed. It moves faster than I can track. Dracone's expression was as cold as winter. Then we bait it. Cassian nodded once. His chainsword purred to life, its teeth shrieking. Agreed. Draw it out. Force it to strike. The trap was set in silence. Guardsmen formed a ragged circle around a false weakness. A lone soldier, trembling, laser gun held unsteady. In truth, Varos's bolter covered every angle, Dracon waited hidden in shadow, and Cassian himself stood just out of sight, a coiled storm. The Manufactorum groaned, shadows shifted. Then a ripple. The air bent, and the lictor appeared in full for the first time. It was a monster of sinew and blade, taller than any man, its talons like scythes forged of chitin and death. Feeder tendrils lashed outward from a skull mask without eyes. Its carapace gleamed with wet camouflage patterns that rippled even as it lunged. It struck for the lone guardsman, and the trap snapped shut. The Manufactorum erupted in violence. Varos's bolter barked first, a storm of mass-reactive shells hammering into the lictor's flank. Explosions tore through its chitin, spraying shards of pale ichor, but the beast did not slow. It shrieked, a sound like steel tearing through bone, reverberating off the walls. The decoy guardsman never even raised his lasgun before a talon swept him aside, his body broken in half with casual ease. Cassian charged. His chainsword screamed, a savage hymn of teeth and steel. He met the lictor head-on, sparks flying as claw met blade. The monster hissed, striking with blinding speed, its second talon slicing the air where his head had been. Cassian ducked, shoulder slamming into its carapace, forcing it back. Dracone struck next, plasma pistol flaring with searing light. The bolt tore into the lictor's chest, burning through armor, sizzling flesh. The smell of scorched alien filled the air. The beast staggered, but did not fall. It retaliated. One talon slashed across Varos's pauldron, tearing away ceramite plating like parchment. Sparks burst as the veteran stumbled, roaring defiance. Another talon lanced out, skewering a guardsman through the chest, pinning him to the wall like an insect. The man's scream cut short as the lictor fed, tendrils burrowing into the still-living body. "Emperor's light," one soldier gasped, voice breaking. "It's feeding on him alive!" Panic spread. The circle broke. Guardsmen scattered in terror, lasbolts firing wild into the shadows. Cassian's voice thundered above it all. "Stand your ground!" He swung with fury, chainsword biting into the beast's arm, carving deep. Ichor sprayed across his armor. The lictor howled, a sound that made hearts seize, and in a blur of motion, it vanished again, shimmering back sank into invisibility. Only blood trails and broken bodies marked its passage. The silence that followed was worse than the fight. Every guardsman panted in terror, weapons raised, scanning the shadows. Varos tore the ruined pauldron from his shoulder, bolter ready, blood running down his arm. Dracone reloaded his plasma pistol with steady hands, though his jaw was clenched hard. Cassian's armor dripped alien ichor, his chainsword revving low, hungry. His voice was calm, but edged like a blade. It is wounded, that makes it more dangerous. A rasping breath echoed through the manufactorum. Then another. The sound came from everywhere at once. Multiple contacts, hissed Varos. Auspex sparking back to life. No, not just one. The readings pulsed. 2 signatures, 3, 4. Dracone's eye narrowed. It was never alone. From the rafters, the lictor dropped again. Not 1, but 2. Twin predators struck in perfect silence, talons gleaming, feeder tendrils writhing. The guardsman broke completely, screams rising as one was impaled, another decapitated, a third dragged screaming into the smoke. Lasbolts filled the air, wild and unfocused. Cassian roared, charging into the fray. His chainsword ripped through chitin and ichor as he split one lictor's arm from its body. The beast shrieked, thrashing, talons gouging sparks from his chestplate. Varos fired point blank, bolt rounds detonating in the creature's torso until it collapsed in ruin. Ichor hissed as it aped through metal. But the second lictor struck Dracone, claws hammering his blade aside. The chaplain met it with unflinching resolve, his Crozius Arcanum ignited with holy power. He brought it down with a 2-handed swing that shattered the monster's skull, spraying ichor and bone fragments in a fan across the wall. The beast twitched once, then lay still. For a moment silence reigned. The surviving guardsmen regrouped, though their number had been halved. But Varus's Auspex screamed again. Dozens of signatures, not just lictors, something heavier. The ground shook, dust rained from the manufactorum's ceiling. Cassian lifted his gaze. A shadow passed across the broken skylight above. The air trembled with a bellow, deeper, heavier than any predator's hiss. The Carnifex had arrived. The manufactorum walls shook as though a god had placed its palm against the structure and shoved. Metal screamed, pipes ruptured, the ceiling split in 3 places, spilling rust and sparks in a choking rain. Then it came, the Carnifex. Its bulk filled the breach as if the very building struggled to contain it. Chitinous plates ridged like mountains across its back, each one etched with alien scars. Its maw was a cathedral of teeth, drooling venom that hissed where it struck the floor. 4 scythe blades the size of tank treads scraped against ferrocrete as it moved, leaving deep gouges with every step. The guardsmen froze. For a heartbeat, even the Space Marines stood in awe. It bellowed. The sound rattled the air, rattled bones. Vox units shorted out in a squeal of static. Varos raised his bolter. Carnifex. His voice was quiet, reverent. He fired. Bolts slammed into its chest, detonations blasting chunks of carapace away. But it did not slow. The guardsmen broke first. They fired as they fell back, las bolts painting the beast in red flashes. It ignored them utterly, trampling two into bloody paste. One was flung aside with a sweep of its talon, his torso bisected before his scream could leave his lungs. Cassian charged. Chainsword howling, he leapt, striking for the creature's face. The blade carved across its eye, spraying foul ichor, but the Carnifex roared and smashed him aside with a sweep of its claw. He hit a wall hard enough to crack ferrocrete, dust rising around his armor as he forced himself back up, coughing blood inside his helm. Dracon advanced in solemn silence, Crozius raised, Vox Brill chanting a battle hymn. "Emperor, guide my strike!" He swung with divine fury, the blow ringing against the Carnifex's jaw with the sound of a thunderclap. Sparks exploded, ichor gushed, and still the monster pressed forward. Varos's voice cut through the chaos. "Aim for the joints!" He fired again, precise volleys that tore ligaments and muscle from the beast's forelimb. The Carnifex faltered, staggering sideways into a support pillar, which collapsed under its weight. But even wounded, it was unstoppable. The beast reared back, tail lashing through the manufactorum floor, impaling a guardsman and dragging him screaming into the air before he was hurled like trash into a furnace. Another was scooped up in its maw, chewed once and spat out as pulp. The remaining guardsmen panicked, their line disintegrating. Cassian's voice boomed over them all. "Hold fast! Stand with us, or you will die on your knees!" The words had weight. A handful steadied, lasguns locking on to the joints as ordered, their fire stitched into the Carnifex's leg, burning black streaks across its chitin. Cassian rose again, broken but unbowed. He charged a second time, ducking under the beast's swing and driving his chainsword deep into the joint of its knee. Ichor sprayed as the chain spun, chewing through tendon and bone. The Carnifex screamed, collapsing to one side with a crash that shook the entire manufactorum. "Now!" Varos bellowed. He and Dracon advanced together. Plasma bolts and holy strikes pummeled the Carnifex's skull. Its armor cracked, fragments of bone and ichor exploding outward. But still it lived. Its head whipped sideways, battering Dracon against a wall. Its tail lashed, snapping Varos's bolter in half. The chaplain struggled to rise, armor crumpled, Crozius still in hand, but slick with his own blood. Varos spat teeth into his helm and drew his combat knife, a last resort against a beast that could devour tanks. The Carnifex rose, looming over them all. Its maw opened, ready to swallow the squad whole. Then, from above, the manufactorum roof split open completely. Something vast and winged screamed down from the sky. Cassian's eyes widened behind his helm. "By the throne!" A harpy descended, wings blotting out the light, its screech a herald of the swarm. The Carnifex was not the only nightmare.
The ceiling tore away like parchment. Steel beams bent, snapped, and fell screaming into the manufactorium as something vast descended. The Harpy. It was a winged leviathan, a predator bred not for the ground, but for terror from above. Its wingspan filled the chamber, membranes stretched taut over bone ridges that stank of ichor. Its screech made teeth ache, a sound like 1,000 knives dragged across slate. Acid dripped from its jaw, sizzling through ferrocrete where it fell. The guardsmen broke again. Some fired upward blindly, laser bolts streaking like sparks against the cavernous dark. Others dropped their weapons, covering their ears as if hands could block the shriek. Cassian roared louder than the beast. "Form ranks! You are soldiers of the Imperium! Stand or be ground into ash!" His voice thundered through Vox systems, cutting through panic with command. Varro staggered to his feet, one arm mangled, blood soaking through shattered ceramite. He still raised his knife, teeth bared, defiance writ into every movement. "I will not fall here." Draken spat blood from beneath his broken helm and pushed himself upright, Crozius humming faintly. "Then neither shall I." The harpy struck first. It swooped low, claws tearing a tank-sized rent in the manufactorium floor as its body scraped through the chamber. Guardsmen were lifted into the air, impaled, and carried screaming into the void beyond. The monster dropped one corpse mid-flight, splattering him across the ferrocrete like a discarded toy. Cassian leapt, his jump pack flared, launching him into the air to meet the beast. He drove his chainsword into its wing, teeth chewing through sinew and tendon. The harpy screamed, wing collapsing against its body as Cassian was hurled free, smashing through scaffolding before landing hard among the rubble. The Carnifex still lived. Half-crippled but murderous, it dragged itself toward Varros and Draken, ichor streaming from its ruined leg. Its jaws clamped shut on a guardsman's torso, ripping him in half with a sickening crunch. The body fell in two steaming heaps, blood pooling around the monster's claws. "Chaplain!" Varros barked, forcing breath through his broken ribs. "We split them! You take the beast on the ground!" Draken's Voxgrill growled a hymn. "The sky will be yours." He lifted his Crozius, stepping to meet the Carnifex once more. Cassian rose slowly, helm cracked, visor glowing faintly. He pressed his gauntlet against the cracked glass until it sealed with a hiss. "Then the skies are mine." He kicked his jump pack, roaring upward toward the harpy again. The chamber became a war zone of clashing titans. Draken met the Carnifex in single combat, holy relic against alien monstrosity. His Crozius hammered down on the beast's skull, cracking bone, spraying ichor across the wall. The Carnifex retaliated with a tail strike that drove him to his knees, armor groaning under the pressure. Still he rose, still he swung. Varros crawled among the ruins of a collapsed pillar, dragging himself to where a discarded missile launcher lay. His bolter was gone, his body half shattered, but his fury burned undiminished. He slammed a missile into the tube, teeth clenched as blood dripped from his mouth. "One last shot," he rasped. Above, Cassian struck the harpy again, chainsword digging into its skull. Acid splattered across his pauldron, burning through blue ceramite and hissing against his flesh. He ignored it, twisting the sword deeper. The harpy screamed and writhed, smashing him against the manufactorium walls, wings battering him with hurricane force. "Fall, beast," he roared. Varos's launcher locked on. He fired. The missile streaked upward, slamming into the harpy's chest. The explosion tore half its torso apart, ichor raining in sheets. The monster shrieked and tumbled, wings snapping bone first as it crashed into the manufactorium floor. Cassian landed amid the wreckage, chainsword ripping free from the creature's skull. His armor smoked from acid, but his stance was unbroken. The harpy twitched once, then went still. But the Carnifex still roared. Bleeding, broken, and half-blinded, it towered over Draken, its massive claw raised for the killing blow. The chaplain raised his Crozius high, blood flooding his vox grill. His words were a whisper, but the Emperor heard them. "I die in his light." The claw descended.
The Carnifex's claw descended like a guillotine, the force of its strike enough to pulverize armored columns. Ferocrete shattered under the blow as Draken shifted at the final instant, the killing strike tearing into the floor instead of his skull. Dust and sparks exploded around him, choking the air with grit and ozone. Draken drove his Crozius upward in riposte. The holy weapon cracked against the beast's mandible, splitting carapace, spraying green ichor across his armor. His vox grill spilled a hymn between ragged breaths. Even in death, his word endures. The Carnifex bellowed, jaws wide, its scream a hurricane of heat and stench. Varos staggered closer, missile launcher clattering empty at his side. He drew his combat blade, a weapon far too small against such a monster, but he raised it nonetheless. His other hand clutched his broken rib cage, blood bubbling with every breath. His voice rasped like torn parchment. "You'll not take him without me, beast." Cassian turned from the harpy's corpse, armor smoking, shoulder plate corroded from acid. His vox cracked with fury. "Fall back! This is my duty!" But neither Draken nor Varos moved. They stood, battered and half-broken, before the towering Carnifex. The Ultramarine's creed bound them tighter than chains. The Carnifex lunged. Draken met it head-on, Crozius shattering teeth as the monster snapped its jaws shut around his pauldron. Ceramite shrieked and split. The chaplain drove his weapon deeper, crushing through gum and bone until the beast reeled backward, ichor spraying in ropes. The Carnifex's tail lashed like a whip. It caught Draken across the torso, flinging him into a shattered column with bone-snapping force. His body struck the stone and fell limp, but his Crozius still burned faintly, sparking with the Emperor's wrath. Varos roared, the sound tearing his throat raw. He climbed the beast's leg, driving his blade between armor plates. The Carnifex bellowed, twisting violently, smashing him against a wall. His blade snapped, half buried in the creature's hide. Cassian leapt with his jump pack, chainsword screaming. He struck the Carnifex across its spine, teeth digging into flesh, ichor spraying across the room in arcs. The monster roared in rage, clawing at him, smashing him to the ground. The impact cratered Ferocrete beneath him, his armor groaning as cracks spread across his breastplate. Draken moved again. Broken, armor ruined, helm cracked. He dragged himself upright. His Crozius sparked weakly in his gauntlet, but his voice was iron. "In the name of Guilliman and the Emperor, I stand." The Carnifex turned toward him, distracted by defiance it could not comprehend. That heartbeat was enough. Cassian rose from the rubble with fury in his eyes. He drove his chainsword upward into the Carnifex's throat. Teeth chewing through flesh and cartilage, the monster shrieked, thrashing violently. Varos, still clinging to its leg, drew a grenade from his belt with bloodied fingers. He jammed it into the wound he had cut, whispering a prayer through cracked lips, "For Makraj." The explosion ripped through the beast's leg. It toppled forward, collapsing under its own weight. Draken dragged himself closer, Crozius raised one last time. With a final roar, he drove it into the Carnifex's skull. The weapon flared with holy light, cracking bone, bursting ichor and fountains. The monster convulsed once, then it fell still. Silence reclaimed the manufactorum, broken only by the hiss of acid burning through stone and the groans of wounded guardsmen. Draken slumped to one knee, helm split, ichor dripping from his armor. His Crozius flickered and dimmed. Varro slid from the corpse's leg, crumpling against its side, his breathing shallow, blood soaking the ground beneath him. Cassian stood among the wreckage, chainsword dripping with alien gore, armor corroded and cracked. His chest heaved, each breath ragged, but his gaze was fixed forward. The Carnifex was dead. The chaplain still lived, but the swarm had not been broken. Through the manufactorum's shattered ceiling, chittering echoed from the ruins above. Gaunts screeched, and wings beat the dust-laden air. The hive mind was not finished. It was adapting. Cassian voxed through the static. Brothers, we bleed, but we endure. The Emperor watches, and he demands more.
The silence did not last. The manufactorum's wreckage groaned under distant tremors, deep reverberations that rattled fractured ferrocrete and sent rivulets of dust cascading from broken rafters. Each shockwave felt heavier than the last, a pulse like a heartbeat growing nearer. Guardsmen glanced to one another, wide-eyed, their last guns trembling and gauntlets slick with blood and sweat. The echoes were unmistakable. Something massive moved in the dark. Drakon forced himself to his feet, Crozius sparking faintly as its power field guttered in and out. His voice was low, drained, but iron-willed. The beast is not the last. The hive never sends one when two can bleed us twice. Cassian's visor flickered, his cracked helm feeding him static-ridden Auspex returns. The readings were madness, shifting blips that came and vanished, an impossible distortion in the ruin. They are cloaked, he said grimly. Something burrows beneath us. Voros leaned heavily against a shattered column, one eye swollen shut, blood seeping through rent ceramite. His gauntlet tapped against the grenade pin still tied to his belt, the last of his munitions. We're spent, Cassian. Ammunition low, half our strength gone. Drakon leaned on his Crozius, his armor cracked open to reveal bloodied flesh beneath. Then we shall make every shot count. A martyr's death is no death at all if it buys another hour of defiance. The Prime roared again, a sound that shook ferrocrete and snapped supports. The manufactorum's ceiling groaned under the vibration, steel beams swaying as sparks rained down. Cassian raised his jump pack and launched skyward, the teeth of his chainsword shrieking. The new battle had begun. Still with us in the darkness, Cassian's vox boomed above the din, though it was half directed at his brothers and half an echo into the void. Strike with us, stand with us, or be devoured. The harpy was dead. The first Carnifex was slain. But the Prime had arrived, and the swarm would not rest until nothing human remained.
The Carnifex Prime thundered forward like a living fortress, every step hammering the manufactorum floor into fractured ruin. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Steel beams bent and shrieked as the chamber trembled under its bulk. The air reeked of acid and ozone, the beast's breath a fetid gale that carried the stink of digestion pits. Its first blow landed. A claw swung through the Imperial barricades, crushing crates, guardsmen, and sandbags into pulp. Limbs and lascons scattered across the floor in a storm of broken humanity. The shockwave alone knocked others off their feet, ears ringing from the thunderclap of Chitin meeting Ferocrete. Cassian launched himself into the air, jump pack roaring. He came down hard onto the Carnifex's ridged back, chainsword chewing into the plates along its spine. Sparks and ichor burst from the wound, but the beast twisted violently, slamming him into a wall with bone-snapping force. Cassian groaned as his armor cracked, a warning rune flashing red across his visor. He forced himself upright, breathing through fire in his lungs. "I will not break," he hissed, reigniting the chainsword. Dracon moved with grim inevitability, Crozius raised. His voice carried through the vox in a broken hymn. As even as flesh fails, his light burns eternal. He struck the Prime's forelimb, sparks erupting as ceramite met chitin. The blow staggered the beast, but it retaliated with a tail strike that smashed the chaplain across the floor, tearing gouges in his armor. Varos, limping and bloodied, took position at a collapsed crane. He braced his bolter, firing disciplined bursts into the creature's joints. Explosive shells detonated against its legs, slowing it fractionally. Each shot echoed like a promise that he would not stop until the beast fell, or he did. The guardsmen poured lasfire into the monster, streams of red stabbing against its hide. Dozens of beams struck, burning black pits into its armor. But the Carnifex roared and charged again, seemingly unfazed, bioplasma cannons spewing gouts of searing fluid across their line. Men dissolved where they stood, their screams cut short as flesh sloughed from bone. A Vox officer raised his handset, blood streaming down his face. "They keep coming! Emperor, preserve us!" His words ended in a choking scream as the Carnifex's claw scythed through him, tearing him in half. Cassian struck again, leaping onto the beast's head, chainsword ramming through an eye. The Prime bellowed, ichor spraying in jets, thrashing violently. It smashed itself against walls and pillars, trying to dislodge him. "Now, brothers!" Cassian roared. Dracon rose again, staggering, Crozius crackling with a weak but steady field. He charged and struck at the creature's knee, each blow cracking carapace, ichor pouring. Varos joined, his bolter spitting fire, targeting the exposed gaps Cassian's strike had opened. The beast faltered. But only for a moment. With terrifying speed, it threw Cassian from its head, smashing him through a machine press. Sparks cascaded as the wreckage collapsed atop him. The chaplain was batted aside by a claw swipe that tore open his chest plate, ichor and blood mingling on his armor. Varos was hurled by the tail, his bolter torn from his grasp, body bouncing against the Ferocrete like a rag doll. The Carnifex Prime stood triumphant, bellowing its victory cry. The wall shook with the force of its roar. Around it, gaunts and rippers poured into the chamber, surrounding the broken humans. Cassian clawed his way free from the wreckage, every nerve screaming in agony. His visor flickered with damage runes, his systems on the edge of collapse. Still, he forced himself upright, chainsword whining back to life. "This wall of flesh will not stand," he whispered. Then louder, "Ultramarines, with me!" Varus dragged himself upright, pulling his sidearm. Dracon raised his Crozius, blood spilling from his mouth. The guardsmen rallied again, battered, half-mad with terror, but unwilling to abandon the line. The Prime charged once more, a moving fortress of chitin and hate. And the Ultramarines prepared to meet it head-on.
The manufactorum floor was already a battlefield grave, but when the Carnifex Prime charged, it became an execution ground. Every quake of its steps shook Ferocrete and Bone alike. It roared, the sound like a grinding avalanche mixed with the shriek of tortured steel. Cassian steadied his breath, armor groaning as he braced. His chainsword whirred to life, battered teeth barking in anticipation. "Form on me!" he barked through Vox, voice a thunderclap. Draken rose first, his crozier still glowing faintly, despite the fractures in its energy field. He limped, but his eyes burned with unyielding fire. "The Emperor watches, brothers. Show him we are worthy." His words were not a prayer for survival, it was a demand for defiance. Varos staggered to his side, plasma pistol blazing. Each shot hissed into the Carnifex's eye, warping chitin, burning into raw flesh. The heat singed even through his gauntlet, but he kept firing until the pistol's vents screamed in protest. The guardsmen, broken but unbroken, regrouped in scattered clusters. Some dragged wounded comrades behind cover, while others leveled their lasguns at the towering horror. Their sergeant raised his battered sword and shouted, "First rank, fire! Second rank, fire!" His voice cracked but held, and the las beams crackled like a storm of defiance. The swarm's tide clashed with that human spark, guardsmen firing and dying in the same breath, but holding long enough to buy the Astartes room to strike. The Carnifex's charge met Cassian. The captain leapt, fueled by fury and his failing jump pack, twisting through the air. The Prime's claw swept upward, but Cassian rolled across its arm, sparks flying as his armor scraped chitin. He drove his chainsword into the beast's shoulder joint, teeth grinding into sinew. Ichor sprayed across his visor, burning as it ate into the lenses. The Prime bellowed and smashed him into a wall, but Cassian held fast, dragging the blade deeper with every second. Draken struck next, Crozius arcing into the Carnifex's knee. The blow cracked the chitin plate, a fracture zigzagging across the monstrous limb. The beast stumbled, balance momentarily faltering. Seizing the opening, Varos fired his last plasma bolt point-blank into the Prime's abdomen, leaving a crater of smoking gore. But the pistol burst, hurling him backward in a storm of heat and shrapnel. Cassian roared, wrenching his chainsword free from the Carnifex's shoulder and then driving it down again into the creature's collar. With every strike, he screamed defiance. "For Macragge! For Guilliman! For the Emperor!" Each word was punctuated by grinding steel and arterial spray. But the Prime was not finished. It bucked like a beast possessed, smashing him into the floor with both claws. Cassian's armor caved in under the weight, ribs snapping, blood filling his mouth. Warning runes screamed across his visor. The captain's grip tightened on his weapon, even as his vision blurred. He would not let go. The Carnifex raised a claw for the killing strike. The guardsmen screamed in panic, lasfire hammering against its hide uselessly. Draken crawled forward, half dead, Crozius dragging on the floor. Varos tried to rise with his combat knife, blood soaking through his ruined armor. It seemed the Prime would end them there. But Cassian spat blood and snarled through broken teeth. "Not yet!" He jammed his chainsword deep into the Prime's exposed throat joint, triggering the weapon at full throttle. The blade screamed, chewing through sinew, carapace, and bone. Black ichor exploded outward in a torrent, drenching the chamber in the monster's lifeblood. The Carnifex shrieked, a sound so loud the manufacturum's window shattered before collapsing to its knees. Cassian, broken but unbent, pulled the blade free and prepared for the final strike.
The Manufactorum fell silent for a heartbeat after Cassian's killing blow. The Carnifex Prime sagged forward, ichor pouring from its neck wound like a ruptured promethium line.
Its massive bulk crashed to the ground, the shock wave shattering broken machinery and throwing dust and blood into the air. The Ultramarines did not celebrate, they only braced, because nothing in this war ended cleanly. The Prime convulsed in its death throes. Its spiked tail lashed wildly, impaling a guardsman through the chest and pinning him screaming to the ferrocrete floor. Claws spasmed, carving through support beams as though they were parchment. The beast's bulk rolled, smashing a crater into the ground, crushing the bodies of the fallen and warping the ferrocrete beneath its sheer weight. The guardsmen scrambled for cover, some dragging the wounded, others raising lasguns, despite knowing their fire was pointless. Their sergeant, voice hoarse from shouting, tried to rally them. "Hold ranks! Don't falter!" His words were more for morale than for tactics, but still, the line held. Cassian lay beneath the monster's shadow, armor crumpled, bones shattered. He could barely move, the weight of the battle pressing down harder than the beast itself. Yet he refused to let go of his chainsword, its teeth still grinding, sticky with black ichor. "I will not die kneeling," he whispered to himself, blood dripping from his lips. Draco staggered to his side. His Crozius was gone, his armor rent, and his chest plate sagged inward with each labored breath. But his hand still burned with faith as he pulled Cassian partly free. "Captain, still you live. The Emperor wills it." Cassian chuckled through broken ribs. "The Emperor wills victory. We are only his instruments." Varos limped into view, helmet gone, face scorched by plasma burn. He dragged himself with one arm, the other still clinging to his combat knife. His voice was raw, but his spirit undimmed. "That thing is not finished." The Carnifex shuddered violently, its ruined throat gurgling. One eye still glowed with sick hunger, its tongue lashing weakly. Despite its mortal wounds, its biology refused to surrender. It tried to rise again, trembling claws pressing into the ferrocrete. Draco bellowed, voice shaking the chamber. "By the Emperor's hand, stay down, abomination!" He seized a broken length of rebar, jagged and slick with blood, and drove it into the creature's ruined throat. Sparks flew where steel met the last fragments of its armored gullet. The Carnifex shrieked in denial, and with a final spasm, its claw smashed into a column. The support gave way, collapsing a section of the Manufactorum ceiling. Rubble fell like a rain of stone, crushing guardsmen, cracking the ground, and burying Draco under a mound of ferrocrete. "Chaplain!" Cassian roared, voice tearing through his broken chest. But the rubble sealed over him, entombing the warrior in silence. The guardsmen were faltering, their sergeant dead, their courage hanging by a frayed thread. Cassian forced himself upright, leaning heavily on his chainsword like a crutch. He activated his vox with a bloody thumb. "To every brother, every guardsman still breathing," he roared through the vox, carried across the Manufactorum floor. "Stand ready. If the swarm wishes to claim this ground, it will choke on our corpses." The guardsmen answered with ragged cheers, lasguns lifted. The Ultramarines readied themselves, and the walls shook again as more tyrannid claws scraped against the Ferocrete. The death of the Carnifex was not an ending. It was an invitation. The swarm was coming.
The Manufactorum did not know silence. Not in this war. Not in this galaxy. The Carnifex's corpse still steamed where Ichor burned through the Ferocrete. Guardsmen gathered what remained of their courage, dragging wounded comrades behind cover, reloading lasguns with shaking hands. Ultramarines, battered but unbowed, repositioned, bolters clutched tight. But beneath the dripping ruin of the beast, the silence cracked. The sound began as a low vibration. Metal rattled in shattered walls. Loose casing shells skittered across the ground. Then the floor itself trembled as if the Manufactorum were built atop a living beast's heartbeat. The guardsmen looked to the Ultramarines. They found no comfort, only grim recognition. Brother Varos rasped through his mangled helm vox. The swarm adapts. Where one beast falls, another rises. We've bought ourselves seconds, no more. Seconds. That was all. The shadows in the Manufactorum's upper levels shifted unnaturally. Lictors. Their mantis-like claws glinted as they crept along the walls and girders, cloaking fields flickering in and out like heat haze. Their alien eyes gleamed, unblinking, locked on prey. "Eyes above!" a guardsman screamed, firing wildly. His last bolt sizzled into the dark. A lictor dropped from the ceiling like a living guillotine. Its talons ripped the man apart before his voice finished echoing. The guard line faltered. Panic threatened to spiral. Cassian staggered forward, forcing himself upright despite cracked ribs and failing armor. His chainsword roared back to life with a banshee's scream. "Hold! Face the Emperor's foes with steel in hand!" He lunged, teeth grinding as his blade carved across the lictor's flank, showering the ground with acidic blood. The beast hissed and recoiled, its camouflage faltering in pain. At the Manufactorum's far end, the Ferocrete walls split as if chewed from beneath. A new monstrosity emerged. Tyrannid warriors, towering and armored, their talons like butcher's hooks, their venom cannons steaming with globules of acid. And behind them came the tide. Gaunts, endless, chittering, screeching, their claws clicking in unison as they poured into the chamber like a living river of death. The guardsmen's lasfire lit up the dark in panic volleys, burning holes into the swarm, but never enough. For every gaunt that fell, 3 more scuttled over its corpse. Brother Varos dragged himself upright, bolter in one hand, combat knife in the other. His face was scorched black from plasma fire, but his voice carried iron. "Brothers, form a phalanx. Guard, fall behind our line." The Ultramarines obeyed without hesitation. Shoulder to shoulder, a blue wall of ceramite bristling with bolters. They stood at the Manufactorum's heart, the anvil upon which the swarm would break, or the meal upon which it would feast. The first wave of gaunts struck. The Ultramarines' bolters thundered, every shot precise. Gaunt skulls burst apart, ichor spraying across Ferocrete. Guardsmen fired from behind the ceramic wall, lasguns stabbing red beams into the tide. Competence turned chaos into survival. The guard aimed where Varos pointed, focusing fire on the swarm's flanks. Bolter fire stitched perfect kill zones, forcing the gaunts into choke points. Even wounded, the Ultramarines were surgeons of war, their discipline carving order out of madness. But the swarm pressed harder. The Tyranid warriors advanced, venom cannons spewing sizzling globules of acid that melted ferrocrete into slag and boiled guardsmen alive in their armor. A lictor lunged from the shadows at Cassian. He pivoted, ribs screaming in agony, raising his chainsword just in time. Its talons clashed against his roaring blade, sparks raining down as steel met chitin. For a moment, man and monster locked, the beast's eyeless face inches from his. Cassian snarled through gritted teeth, you will not take me!" With a brutal twist, he forced the chainsword upward, sawing through the lictor's arm at the elbow. Black ichor sprayed, sizzling against his armor. The beast screeched and darted back into shadow, wounded but not slain. The manufactorum had become a slaughterhouse. Guardsmen were cut down screaming, their bodies broken under gaunt claws. Ultramarines bled into the ferrocrete, ceramite cracking under the relentless tide. But they did not break. Cassian bellowed into the vox, his voice raw thunder. "We are the wall. We are the Emperor's wrath made manifest. Let the swarm choke on our defiance." The guardsmen rallied behind the cry. Lasfire burned hotter, blades flashed in desperate melee. Their fear became rage, their terror forged into courage by the example of giants bleeding beside them. Yet even as they fought like lions, Cassian saw the truth. The swarm was endless, and unless salvation came, soon there would be no one left to tell this story. The manufactorum shook with every impact of claw against steel. Gaunts poured in without end, their screeches mixing with the sharp crack of lasguns and the thunderous roar of bolters. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with the chaos of battle, heavy with the stink of blood, promethium smoke, and alien ichor. Captain Cassian stood at the center of the melee, armor cracked, ribs grinding, his chainsword roaring in brutal arcs that split gaunts in two with every strike. Yet for every creature slain, more pressed in, clawing at his legs, snapping jaws inches from his throat. This battle was not one they could win. Survival required something more desperate, something reckless, something worthy of the Emperor's scorn or blessing. "Varos!" Cassian shouted above the din, voice raw with blood and fury. "We cannot hold this ground without burning it. We must bring the manufactorum down." The sergeant's scorched face turned toward him, his single good eye narrowed. "You mean collapse the sector? Bury us with them?" Cassian's answer was grim steel. "If that is the price, better ashes than infestation." For a heartbeat, Varos hesitated, his breath wheezing through blackened lungs. Then he nodded. "So be it. Tell me where to place the charges." The guardsmen heard whispers of the plan through the vox. Many looked stricken, but their sergeant, one of the few still standing, gritted his teeth and barked at his men. "You heard the Astartes. Plant satchel charges, fuel lines, anything. The manufactorum dies before it falls to the Xenos." They moved with desperate purpose, slapping crack grenades to support beams, wiring promethium drums into makeshift traps. They had no time for precision, only fury, only speed. The Tyranids pressed harder, as though sensing the humans' intent. Warriors advanced, venom cannons spitting gouts of acid fire that melted cover into rivers of bubbling slag. A guardsman screamed as a glob struck him, his flesh slouging from his bones in wet sheets. Through it all, Cassian cut a path, his chainsword a screaming beacon, his voice never faltering. "Faster! Every second is theirs, not ours!" The lictors returned. One struck from the ceiling, impaling 2 guardsmen before they could scream. Another flickered into existence behind Varos, its claws poised for the kill. Varos turned with inhuman speed, his bolter already raised. He fired point blank, blasting the lictor's head into steaming fragments. Its corpse collapsed into him, knocking him back to one knee. He shoved it off, coughing blood but still fighting. "Not yet, Xenos," he growled, jamming a fresh magazine into his weapon. The detonations were nearly ready. Guardsmen wired fuses with trembling hands, sweat mixing with grime on their faces. Each knew they were preparing their own tomb, but not one wavered. One young guardsman muttered, voice cracking as he pressed a final charge to a pillar. "Emperor, forgive me. I don't want to die." Cassian's voice thundered over him. "The Emperor does not forgive the weak. He exalts the faithful. Stand tall, soldier. Die proud." The boy swallowed, nodded once, and set the charge. The Tyrannid surged again. Cassian was slammed backward by a warrior, its talons crashing against his armor like a thunder hammer. Pain flared white-hot as the impact drove him into a shattered wall. But before the beast could finish him, Varos hurled himself into its flank, combat knife flashing, jamming into the warrior's throat joint. It shrieked, spinning to crush him, but Cassian's chainsword ripped upward in a vicious arc, splitting the monster from belly to jaw. The warrior collapsed, its acidic blood spraying both marines. Varos wheezed, his voice barely a rasp. "The Emperor still favors us." Cassian pulled him upright, "Or he toys with us. Either way, we fight." The charges were primed. Promethium barrels leaked rivers of volatile liquid across the manufactorum floor, pooling beneath broken machinery and bodies alike. The air stank of vapor, ready to ignite with the smallest spark. "Captain," a guardsman shouted over the vox, "all charges set." Cassian scanned the swarm. More gaunts poured in, climbing over their dead. Warriors pushed from behind, their screeches echoing across the chamber. Lictors stalked the shadows, and deeper within, something larger stirred, a rumble that shook the manufactorum foundations. They were out of time. Cassian raised his chainsword high, ichor dripping, teeth whining. His voice carried like thunder through the vox. "Brothers, guardsmen, this manufactorum dies with us. Ignite every charge, every barrel, every grenade. Let this place burn as our pyre and the swarm's tomb." A roar answered him, desperate, defiant, final. The Emperor's hammer was about to fall. The manufactorum became a cathedral of ruin. Its broken rafters hung like the ribs of a dead god, shadows shifting where lictors skulked, and the endless tide of gaunts poured like living sewage across the ferrocrete. The ultramarines and guardsmen stood bloodied, half buried in corpses, but they stood still. For all its horror, the chamber felt holy in that moment. The faithful had chosen their altar. Fire would be their sacrament. Detonate on my mark,
Cassian growled, his broken chest heaving as he leaned on his chainsword. His vox sputtered static with every breath, but his voice carried iron. The guardsmen clustered around the remaining ultramarines, clutching detonator cords like prayer beads. Some wept silently, others muttered catechisms through clenched teeth. Not one dropped their weapon. Brother Varus limped to Cassian's side, blood pouring from a dozen wounds. His helmet was gone, revealing a face carved into a mask of charred flesh, one eye blinded, the other burning with fury. "Say the word, Captain. We will turn this manufactorum into a tomb no beast will ever leave." The tyrannid swarm surged once more. Warriors bellowed, venom cannons spitting globules of sizzling fire that melted promethium barrels and turned guardsmen into screaming shadows on the walls. Lictors darted between beams, cutting men down in silence. The gaunts came like a tide, leaping onto the barricades, jaws snapping. Guardsmen fired point-blank, bayonets flashing, laser guns burning through alien skulls, even as claws tore them apart. Still they fought. Still they bought seconds. Seconds enough. "Now!" Cassian roared, raising his chainsword high. The manufactorum lit with light. Satchel charges exploded along the support beams in perfect sequence, detonators hammered by desperate thumbs. Crack grenades popped in cascading arcs, tearing through ferrocrete and steel alike. Promethium drums ignited with a roar, fire crawling like a starving predator across the floor. The blast wave ripped through the chamber, vaporizing gaunts by the hundreds, hurling tyrannid warriors against the walls where their armor shattered under their own weight. A lictor screamed as its cloaking field burned out, its body lit into a living torch before it crumpled to ash. The guardsmen had no time to scream. Many died instantly, consumed in holy fire. Others were thrown into walls, crushed beneath falling rubble as the manufactorum groaned and began to collapse. Cassian himself was lifted from his feet, hurled across the chamber. His armor split on impact, ribs snapping again, vision dimming under the haze of blood and flame. But he clung to his chainsword still, its teeth whirring weakly, like the last prayer of a dying saint. The manufactorum fell. The ceiling caved, crushing waves of gaunts. Walls burst outward, sending fire plumes into the black sky. The tyrannids screamed as acid blood boiled in their veins, as rubble crushed their twisted forms, as fire consumed their swarm flesh. Even the mighty tyrannid warriors staggered under the inferno, their carapace cracking and splitting under the pressure. And beneath it all, the earth shook, whether from collapsing structure or the movement of greater beasts beneath, none could tell. Through the firestorm, Cassian heard voices on the vox, fragments of guardsmen's last words. "Furcadia, tell my son I stood tall. Emperor, guide us." Each voice vanished in static, cut short by flame or falling stone. When Cassian's vision cleared, he was pinned beneath rubble, his armor mangled but alive. His helm was gone, his face scorched raw, blood poured into his eyes, turning the firestorm into a crimson haze. Beside him lay Varus. The sergeant's chest no longer rose, but his bolter was still clenched in one burned hand, his combat knife buried in the skull of a dead gaunt.
The guardsmen were ash and silence. Only ultramarine ceramic glinted faintly through the wreckage. Cassian spat blood, forcing his vox online. His voice was no more than a rasp, but it carried. Any brother who lives, regroup, rally to me. No answer came. Only the distant screech of more tyrannids echoing through the smoke. The manufactorum burned, reduced to ruin, but the swarm had not ended. Shadows still moved in the fire, claws scraping against Ferrocrete. They had slain hundreds, perhaps thousands, but the hive was endless. And Cassian knew, if this was to be his tomb, he would not die quietly. He would die fighting.
The ruins of the Manufactorum roared like a furnace, every corridor a throat belching smoke and fire. Cassian dragged himself free of the rubble, each movement to war against his own body. His armor was cracked and sparking, one pauldron gone entirely, ribs grinding with every breath. But his hand refused to let go of his chainsword, its whining motor sputtering like a dying hymn. Around him, silence. No guardsmen, no brothers, only firelight and the stench of burning alien flesh. Then, movement. Figures stumbled from the rubble. Two ultramarines, staggering but alive. Brother Malchian, helm split open, one arm severed at the elbow. Brother Decius, limping, blood spraying with every step, but still carrying his bolter. They saw Cassian, and their voices cracked with stubborn fury. "Captain, we still breathe." Cassian nodded, forcing his broken body upright. 3 warriors left, 3 blades of the Emperor. And in the firelight, the swarm was coming again. First came the Gaunts, crawling like vermin from cracks and collapsed ducts, their bodies blackened from fire, yet still gnashing. Then larger shadows. 2 ultramarine warriors, one missing an arm, but still hissing, its venom cannon bubbling with molten ichor. And behind them the ground trembled. A carnifex, its silhouette filling the ruined gate. It was scarred from the explosion, its armor cracked, one eye melted into a seared socket. But it still lived, its bulk swaying like a siege tower, its maw dripping acid. The Manufactorum had become their killing pit. Cassian's lips peeled back over broken teeth. He planted his chainsword into the Ferrocrete and forced himself to stand tall. Brothers, this is the Emperor's test. We are his wall. We do not falter. Malchian bared his teeth, blood trailing from his mouth. Until death, Captain. Decius slammed a fresh mag into his bolter. Until death. The swarm surged. Decius opened fire, bolt rounds exploding gaunts into sprays of bone and ichor. Malchian charged, chainsword blazing, carving a warrior's leg into shards, even as claws ripped into his torso. The sergeant roared as his life was torn away, still dragging his blade deeper, refusing to yield even as his organs spilled. Cassian staggered forward, meeting the other warrior head-on. His chainsword bit into its chest, chewing through armor plates. The beast shrieked, striking him with scything talons, splitting his armor and nearly tearing him apart. Cassian howled and drove the blade deeper until the warrior burst in a gush of steaming blood. But then came the Carnifex. It slammed into the chamber, shaking the ground. Its claws sheared through ferrocrete supports, its maw belching acidic spittle that hissed across Cassian's leg. Decius stood before it, firing round after round into its face. The Carnifex roared and charged, smashing him aside with a blow that turned his body into pulp against the wall. Cassian, broken but unyielding, charged forward. The Carnifex reared, claws raised like executioners' axes. Cassian sprinted into the beast's shadow, his chainsword revving one last time. He leapt, a broken angel of war, and buried his blade into the monster's throat. The teeth bit, dug, screamed. Acid blood splashed across his face, burning flesh to bone, but he did not stop. He roared with every ounce of life left, carving through the Carnifex's gullet, tearing it open from within. The beast shrieked, stumbled, slammed into the burning walls. Fire rained from above, rubble crashing down. Cassian did not let go. The Manufactorum collapsed entirely. Flames and stones swallowed Ultramarine and Carnifex alike, burying them in fire and ruin. For a long time there was silence. Then, deep beneath the rubble, a sound. The faint whine of a chainsword sputtering in the dark.
When the fires finally died, the Manufactorum was nothing but a grave. Its towers, once proud, were reduced to skeletal husks of steel. The skies above were blackened by smoke, ash falling like snow across the shattered plain. No song, no vox, no marching tread of soldiers remained, only silence. Days later, Imperial forces reclaimed the ruin. They found little more than scorched biomass, the corpses of gaunts and warriors mingled with the crushed masonry. Of the Carnifex, nothing remained but a cracked carapace split down the throat, its ruin a testament to one man's will. And in that ruin, buried beneath 30 tons of ferrocrete and steel, they found him. Captain Cassian, armor shattered, body broken beyond healing, still clutched the haft of his chainsword. His face was burned to ruin, his lungs filled with ash, yet his gauntlets gripped the weapon so tightly they had to cut it free. He had died on his feet. The apothecaries took his gene seed. His name was entered into the rolls of heroes. For 10,000 years hence, his deeds would be spoken of in hushed tones, an echo of defiance against the swarm. The guardsmen who survived whispered of his sacrifice in their own way. They carved a crude aquila on the blackened stones of the Manufactorum's gate, a reminder that on the day the swarm came, 3 Ultramarines stood against the impossible and gave their all. But as the ash fell and the ruins grew cold, the void beyond the world stirred once more. The High Fleet had not stopped. The swarm was only pausing, gathering, hungering. For in the 41st millennium, there is no end, only war.